And it affects how much you're a victim of the sunk cost fallacy. So I've
All
been
right.
part of a lot of refactorings. Many have actually helped to pay down tech debt. Every now and again, you put your heart and soul into something that took a lot of the team equivalent of political capital and effort and creativity and effort, and then the result isn't as good because you just
Yeah.
didn't quite know what the design would look like. If that's taken your team person weeks worth of effort, it's pretty big call to say let's just revert, and maybe even difficult because we've done other things over the top of it. If you tried it out
Yeah.
and then just like, oh, actually, no, actually we were right the first time, then everyone doesn't have their egos invested in the big change, and you can let it thank it
Right.
and let it go, and it's just taught you something,
Yeah.
and that's fine.
Chris Ford has been at ThoughtWorks now for nearly 15 years and is a distinguished technical leader and experienced consultant who has helped organizations in Australia, the United Kingdom, United States, India, Uganda, Spain, and Germany improve their software delivery effectiveness. He is a prominent public speaker and writer on functional programming and agile software development. Since 2018, he's lived in Barcelona. I'm not at all jealous about that. And I love what he's been writing about generative AI on LinkedIn the last few months, and I've been working hard to get him on the show. So I'm really excited to have him here. Today's guest is Chris Ford. Chris, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Really nice to be here, Carl.
Talk to us about your background. 15 years is a long time. You've probably worked on all sorts of different accounts and projects at this point. Yeah, help us get a better sense of your career.
Sure. Yeah. Well, as a consultant, one of the privileges is you get to work with a lot of different clients that have a lot of different problems. The other thing that you get to do, if especially in my case, is get to travel around a lot. So I started out working for ThoughtWorks UK. I moved to India, then to Uganda, then to Scotland, then back down to London before finally heading to Barcelona. A lot of the stuff I've been doing involves giving advice to clients because once you move around a lot, one of the benefits you have is you see lots of different ways of doing things, some that are effective, some that are not effective, some that are contextual. So, one of the services that a good consultant does, I think, for a client is to give that horizontal perspective and work with them to work out what actually is useful for them in their context, hopefully without being too much of a, you know, interloper who just chucks a bunch of slides at someone and gives them a pre-canned opinion. So listening is a big part of it as well.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, and I can only imagine doing it these days, right? A lot of the questions you're getting are probably leaning towards like, what do we do with all this generative AI stuff? Yeah.
Exactly. I'd say a lot of my clients at the moment are retail and travel. In particular, there's a lot of that in Europe that we work with, and they tend to be divided into three categories, but all of which are generative AI based. So one is how do I use generative AI to be more effective working internally, giving my colleagues better ways of doing things. One is how do I give different or better experiences to my customers? And the final one that I guess is your emphasis is how do I do software development better? And that's where, especially as
Yeah.
ThoughtWorks, given we're a software development consultancy, that's where a lot of the conversations land.
Yeah, 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 yeah. I can only imagine being inside of ThoughtWorks over the last little bit, right? I mean, it was sort of always predicated on, best engineering processes possible and all of this. And there's just been so much rapid change.
Yeah, well, it used to be that you had to worry a lot about small tests, doing in thin slices, and having engineering discipline, focusing on value. And now you just have to do all of those things with LLMs. But yeah, to some extent, I'm slightly joking, but to some extent, I think my take would be that
Right.
the extreme programming vision has actually stood up pretty well in the age of generative AI, and that a lot of things that Kent Beck was originally suggesting we do, if anything, is more important when we've got coding agents going away and doing things.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That is starting to feel true for me. Talk a little bit about what you recently wrote in terms of like what the bottleneck might be. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I think the volume of my LinkedIn posts is increasing both in terms of noise and frequency. So I think I know the one that you mean.
So
One of
there's
the
more signal in there because
Yeah,
it's all
exactly.
fine. Yeah.
Exactly. So I think the thing that I've come to believe recently that is discomforting to me is that human in the
Hmm.
loop is not a viable paradigm for agentic software development. So by human in the loop,
Right.
I mean basically you review the diffs that come around each time. So you treat the
Yeah.
AI as a kind of a low-level delegatee. You say, please do this, and when it comes back, you review it much like it's a pull request or a local diff. I've come to believe that if that's necessary and the only way we can review the work of generative I think I'd actually argue that
Yeah.
generative AI will not be a success because I don't think that's a viable path. One reason is
Yeah.
I just don't think human attention works like that. To make an analogy with self-driving cars, I
Hmm.
know that there's I think is it level three? I never get the levels right, but there's a level that
Hmm.
basically says, we're going to drive, but you have to be paying attention while doing nothing. And then we
Right.
might throw control back to you and you have to act. And I've always
Hmm.
felt that was a fig leaf. That feels like accountability laundering. It's just a way of people who are
Hmm.
trying to supply self-driving cars to say, oh, things got a bit sticky. Okay, it was the human's fault because they were the one that were driving at the point where the bad thing happened. But I don't think that if you think of yourself kind of paying attention, it takes a really strong will and discipline to not drift off or not check your phone or not start
Yeah.
thinking about what
Yeah.
you're going to
Yeah.
have
Yeah.
to do tonight. I think it's exactly the same
Yeah.
when you're watching just diffs come past. The amount of textual change that generative AI gives you when you're working with a coding agent is a similar thing. Especially also, things like tool use and so on. Eventually, you're like, yeah, yeah, buddy, oh yeah, fine, sure, sure, sure. I really
Yeah.
don't
Yeah.
think
Yeah.
it's reasonable to
Yes.
expect human beings
Yes.
to,
Yes.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Like the bird that Homer delegates to when he's working from home at the nuclear plant, just hits the yes, hits the. That's what people become. So I think we will do the same thing. So I just think if we need to be
Hmm.
vigilant, like maybe someone working on an airport scanner, just ready for that one moment in 1,000 where we have to act, I just don't think that's going to work. But the plus side
Okay.
is, I
So
don't
this
think
seems.
text. Oh, sorry, go.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I was going to say I won't call this a hot take because it seems like it's fairly well thought through. This doesn't sound, but
Yeah,
it's spicy nonetheless, right? I mean, the human in the loop is like been everybody. You hear human in the loop quite often,
yeah. I think it can be easy.
but
Yeah.
I like it. I like that we're hearing something new. But yeah, sorry. Finish your thought.
No worries. Yeah, and I think it's comforting because you can say, I get all the benefits of my previous way of doing things and some of the benefits of the new
Yeah.
way. So I wanted to reach for
Hmm.
that. I thought of it that way as well. I was thinking, oh, maybe I would write the tests and then the AI would write the production code and I'd review it or something like that. That I would be able to exercise the same degree and method of due diligence that I did before in an agentic
Right.
world. But I've come to believe that actually kind of a conversational and multimodal review is more effective than diff review anyway. Like I never
Hmm.
really felt like I mean at ThoughtWorks we're quite often advocating, depending on client context, to a continuous delivery model where maybe you pair program but you don't have a pull request approach. But I've always felt that pull requests, when they're small but pull requests, people pay attention and are maybe meaningful. But anything that gets into
Yep.
the four digits is a like looks
Yep.
good to me kind of scenario. And I never really,
Yep.
I always felt it was a little bit of accountability laundering. Oh, you merged it, so if I did something wrong, it's your fault for letting me. And I
Yeah.
didn't really feel like a collaborative arrangement. But when I've been using
Yep.
generative AI more, I find myself doing things like, I don't know, asking the coding agent, please review your work. And I know it's surprising
Yeah.
because you might think that it wouldn't find things, but it totally does find things. That
Oh,
that,
it
that does
does.
work.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or
Yep.
I would ask it, okay, what are we testing? Or I would say, what would happen in this case? So I would basically spend my
Doesn't that mean
time.
the human's still in the loop, though? You're still prompting it to say, like, "Hey, go check your work, buddy."
You're right. So I guess I would be doing that like asynchronous, that review, but maybe you're good prompts because what I'd be spending maybe more time doing is asking or interrogating the harness. Okay, so what was the
Mm.
things that the agent was doing to check its own work? Are
Oh, I
those
like
things
that.
sufficient? So I might ask the
Hmm.
agent, how do you know that that works? As I might actually do for a
Yeah.
colleague when I'm trying to find
Yeah.
evidence that things work, not just believe and trust. So um,
Yeah.
that reinvestment in the environment that the agent's operating in, well, A, actually I think it's a richer way of doing things, but B,
Yeah.
it pays itself back over and over again rather than just once for that particular pull request.
Yeah. Yeah. There's been some great like I think it was an OpenAI blog post about how to
Exactly.
always fix the system instead of manually doing it. Yeah, yeah. Okay, I like where you're going with that. So let me interrogate how much you mean in the loop, because you said oh, can't be in the loop,
Yeah,
and you use pretty specific language, but then you say, but oh yeah, there will still be conversational review and this and that. And I think I'm with you on PRs. A lot of people are
yeah,
with you on PRs. People are talking about PRs are becoming the bottleneck now, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah,
And I personally, I can remember being on ThoughtWorks projects where we were not doing PRs, right? And it was great. It was proper chunk-based development, proper, push and continuous delivery. Really, really loved it. And, and I'm sad that I have to live in a world now where I don't get that anymore. But most of the world is doing PRs, Chris
yeah.
Ford. So if you're now going to say they're the bottleneck, and which I think a lot of us are thinking that, and you're saying human can't be in the loop, what do you mean? Because you obviously mean the humans in the loop somewhere still.
So
Yeah.
human are involved. I guess I'm being somewhat pedantic and precise by what I mean by the loop, which was what you were getting at with the question. So specifically, I think diff reviewing is not viable when the quantity
Code
of
diff
diffs come
review.
up.
Yeah.
So I do think
Yeah.
that we should be concerned with quality from the outside. I do think that
Right.
it's reasonable for an engineer to go, oh, I wonder how that works, and kind of dive in if they want. But the quality assurance discipline that the person's applying should be asynchronous and external, as opposed to,
Yeah.
oh, this is the red and the green of the diff, that's good or that's bad.
Yeah. 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 So I think yes, definitely. And I think there's, a category of folks who are very much in diff review camp and still doing it, whether they're thinking of it as PRs or not. They're actively reviewing all the diffs. And I think there's another camp of folks who are not, and they're kind of acting more like an engineering manager or maybe a technical product manager even. And, they're doing desk checks.
Yeah.
But they're not even reviewing unit test suite, or well, and maybe they ought to be, I don't know, but they're certainly not reviewing the diffs anymore. But actually, maybe I've hit upon a good question. Should they still be reviewing the test suite?
So I think that they should be talking to the test suite rather than reading it end to end. I think that's more productive. So I think actually asking what
Okay.
examples are informed by the test suite, or saying, what about this? And therefore poking a
Yeah.
hole in the test suite, yes. I also just think textual start to finish reading of the test suite is about as useful as, a start to finish of one of the letters and reading an encyclopedia. I don't actually think it's a even if you're from the
Mm,
extreme programming world or the unit test as art world, where you're very careful to make your tests be examples and be as illustrative as possible, I still think it's hard to just read your way through and really understand what you need to understand. So I'd rather have a conversational relationship with them, and the better you structure your tests, the better the conversation is going to be, because the large language model is going to be able to pull out the relevant things based on the naming and structure and so on.
yeah, I like that. But to your point, there's still going to be an element, even if it's well structured, of aardvark, Alabama,
Yeah.
Amsterdam, sort of where it's even if it's well structured, it's gonna. Yeah, I like how you talked about talking to the test suite instead of reading it. That almost seems to presuppose or propose having a QA agent that's in charge of QA strategy or something like this. What do you mean when you say talking to the test suite?
So I'm sure that you could use a skill or a sub-agent to better manage the context and the focus. I haven't found that you necessarily need to use those concepts within your coding agent to be effective. I must admit, and maybe I could even optimize my usage better, but I must admit that I'm often sitting in normal mode, and then it's by the instructions that I give that I put that focus on. I know that there are such things as architect skills or QA subagents and so on, and I can see why that would be an advantage. But I think that's really an optimization. The key thing is that you have a period of time when you are paying attention to that aspect of the
Yeah,
job you're doing and
yeah,
acting on it. And then it's
right.
probably better tools that everyone can learn over time.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay. So maybe if that's how you want to do it, but the important thing is that you, as the responsible person,
Yeah.
are still paying attention to it some percent. Yeah, yeah, yeah. That lines up for me. I like that. I like that.
And
Okay.
maybe if I could just
Oh,
build on that, I think one very important thing is, if coding agents are allowing you to go faster, you don't just eat the surplus and move on to the next task, the next feature immediately. I think it's
yeah,
very
yeah,
important, in order to fight against the forces of chaos and pay down entropy, that if you can do something twice as fast, you spend some of that half your time you saved in this kind of conversational quality and harness reinvestment. If you don't, I think it's kind of literally a chaotic system where error magnifies over time, and you'll feel good at first, and then you'll feel worse,
Uh-huh.
and then eventually you'll end up with
Hmm.
something that is very hard to change.
I resemble that remark. As goes the old joke when someone. Yeah, no, I totally get where you're coming from, and yes, on a good day I'm doing that, and on a bad day I'm not. Yeah,
But
I hear
I think
you.
that's the
Okay.
price we pay to be allowed to use these toys. I think if we don't,
Yeah.
then we'll end up having them taken away from us.
I have a friend who was showing me his orchestration system, and he's got all of these different agents, and he's got this process that he's built up, and he explains that he must have the entire process followed on every story that he brings it, and some of it is sort of getting into like, oh, it's going to do that, it's going to look for tech debt like on every story, and it's like, okay, maybe I don't know. I like where you were going around, like, no, you have to be inspecting this, you have to be at least talking with it. Yeah.
But what I really like about what you're saying your friend is doing is that they are taking responsibility for thinking about their system of work. So
Yeah.
probably actually, if anything, I hope that their agents and elaborate setup are helping them. But to be honest, I think probably 80% of the value, just like maybe with estimates, it's not the output, it's the thinking that they did in order to
It's
get
the
there.
thinking. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I think he would say it's helping. He's also explaining that each thing, sort of iteration is an hour instead of a few minutes. But he feels like he's got a belt and suspenders approach to it that makes it more worthwhile. Okay, so I love how we sort of just jumped into the middle, right? That's good, but I often follow a bit of a cadence or a set of questions, and I do kind of want to get to those. So let's talk about you and how you work when you're using these tools. Do you have favorite generative AI tools that you like to reach for? I mean, I can imagine on client projects, you maybe on this one you're forced to use this, and on that one you need to use that. Or how? But what are you liking personally? Let's start with what you like. Yeah.
Well, I love the CLI, and I'll acknowledge that that's a human preference as well as a technical opinion, though what I'm very excited about at the moment is that I think what I want to do and what is a good thing to do are coinciding quite well. So I'm definitely pleased with that. Specifically, I would say I'm really enjoying using Claude Code, and I'll explain why in a way that maybe you will see as shallow, that Claude Code has a better Vim mode than the other options. So
Oh,
when I'm messing with my prompt, it's easier. For example, on Codex, you can, I think it's Control G or Command G, you can bring up kind of like a window like you're editing a commit in Git and use that. But
yeah,
actually, Claude kind of does better there. What I try to do actually is rotate between them because I don't think that there's a sustainable
yeah,
advantage that anyone has. I think Claude Code's great. I think Codex is great. I have no reason to believe that like GitHub's one is not great, but I haven't really given it enough of a
yeah,
test drive yet. Uh, in the end, there's a little bit of benefit you get from the chassis, but I think the improvement of models is what's really driving the improvement in these tools.
yeah, yeah. I'm with you. I'm with you. And I like that you're getting to play with multiple. I did get to play with Gemini CLI for a couple of hours one day, for an experiment, and I ended up thinking it was pretty good. I haven't really run it through its paces or everything, but I remember feeling like, yeah, this is not worse than Claude Code in any way. So yeah,
No, no. I mean, I think
yeah,
probably I'd prefer any of the tools with the models that we have now than any of the tools with the models we had last September,
yeah.
October.
In the past,
Yeah.
yeah.
So I think the kind of the delta is more model than chassis.
100%. 100%. Okay. Guardrails that you find, right? And some of this you've hinted at, right? With the extreme programming, and so on. And of course, Vim key bindings. That's probably a good guardrail too. No, not really. But what guardrails do you like in terms of making sure that you keep the tools effective?
Sure. I find that the kind of things I might have done in extreme programming context are actually quite similar. So I guess I would always be asking for unit tests with high coverage and business value integration tests, maybe headless. That's a lot of what I would be doing. I find myself more than I did when I was coding by hand, doing things like setting up Git hooks or other things like that, where I kind of make it harder for there to be a screw up because there needs to be a
Yeah,
pre-commit running that does a simple version of the code.
got it. Any superpowers you're finding that the tools had that kind of surprised you?
So I think I can give two answers. There's kind of one generic one, which is I'm finding that I'm doing things that I would have never bothered to do before. So it really does feel like a superpower. It's a boring superpower, perhaps, but oh, I have this. I'm full of engineer ideas. Oh, it'd be great if I did this. And I have a typical cycle that would be, oh, I should make a Monte Carlo simulation to try out this thing. And in the past, I would have maybe started it, got distracted halfway through, and never had time to finish.
Yeah,
And in a
yeah,
way, I would have just got my endorphin rush from the idea and then abandoned it. I see those things through, at least to the point where I can see whether it was a good idea or not, or whether there's something I need to think to build on it, whether it's something even it's seriously good that I need to take further. That's kind of the first level of superpower, I think, because it's really a bit of Jevons paradox or something like that, where you lower the cost of things and then
hmm,
suddenly things that weren't worth exploiting or doing before become it. So that's
yeah,
transformative in a way that's hard to explain when I'm just talking to you about, oh, I can do low value tasks now. It actually is transformative in aggregate.
yeah.
The other
It is.
superpower that I
Yep.
think is maybe more interesting is for reviewing English writing. So I'm finding myself
Hmm.
when I'm writing uh, pieces or articles or maybe other things that I've got coming up is I could say things like I'm going for a writing style that is somewhere between Joel Spolsky, Martin Fowler, and Spike Milligan, and it will meaningfully be able to tell me, oh, you're a bit too informal here, or I think you've gone a bit straight here, and it's a bit boring. So I find that style
Wow.
guiding while writing English language is effective in roughly analogous a way as your agents.md or Claude MD, where you give style guides about code. And that surprises me that it's as effective as it is. Now, I don't think it is at the stage where I can say, do a Spike Milligan edit where it goes and spikes my code, or sorry, spikes my blog post. But I do
Yeah,
think
yeah.
that saying, tell me where, give me an indication as a warning of where my intended voice and the voice that you're seeing don't align. And that's been a
Mm,
really good experience.
I love that. I love that. Yeah, your first superpower, like I can definitely echo that. Like a team that I'm on, they had an end-to-end test suite that was, you know, pretty useful, but kind of falling behind, and then they'd catch it back up again. And recently, with their new superpowers, because they now have these tools, they not only like keeping it like really up to date, but now it's involved in like a sneak vulnerability rotation where it just auto fixes all the sneak vulnerabilities and comes up and says like, "This is what I've done for you. Is that what you would like?" And you get to go and say yes, 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 please. So and it's doing the EDE on it all. So it's like stuff that was a bit of a chore and still worthwhile, but didn't get to invest enough. Now it's like, no, we're taking it to, and that's the kind of thing that they would have thought of before, but
Yeah.
they would have been like, how am I going to pitch that to the product manager about like why we should take a week off to do this? And now it's just, oh, I have lunch free, I can do it.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
how often in the
So
past would you have
100%.
said, I'm sure we could have caught that bug if we'd implemented property testing or mutation testing to see our coverage, or
Yeah.
I think this is a great time to try out TLA plus. I'm not really sure about that syntax, but I think if I modeled what was going on here, I'd have a great assurance. You can use
Yeah.
that ability to do things that maybe have non-obvious or non like inevitable payoffs, give them a go and see. And so I just to add in the spicy takes, I think that can get you into a situation where you can achieve higher quality using agentic coding than doing by hand because of your ability to
Yeah.
wander down these different paths and potentially
Yeah.
add new kinds of feedback or new kinds of guardrail to your project.
Yeah. 100%. Okay, now let's start thinking about the teams that you serve,
Yeah.
or teams that you are getting a chance to observe, right? What are you observing about how they use the tools? Has it changed at all how product management and story breakdown works? So, are are LLMs writing the stories and LLMs are reading the stories? Like it's never that simple. But like, what are you seeing in terms of product management and story breakdown?
I'm seeing product managers delegate less hands off than coders because they have a less deterministic and formal situation. So I work in a lot of contexts where there's probably programs of or cooperating organizations of many agile teams. So, maybe there's 50 people or 100 people or 150 people that are divided up into different responsibilities. They have their own domain, they have their own systems they own, and they've got to get stuff done. So they'll have product people, or if you use an older term, business analysts working on things. And those business analysts are normally, they're very inquisitive, analytic people. So they will be thinking about ways that they can use generative AI maybe to summarize notes or draw out meaning from documentation, or even just something literally like we did an in-person facilitation and we need to write up all the sticky notes that were on the wall. Those kind of things people will use it for. So it's kind of
Yeah.
very like
Yep.
delegating tasks. I have to say that the aspect of interrogating reality and figuring it out what we would like the program to do is quite an art still, or a discipline. And I don't see us getting rid of excellent product people and replacing them with a kind of
Right.
a sub agent that writes stories. I'm not sure whether that's theoretical possible, but it's certainly not something that I'm thinking will happen in the near future.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm with you. I'm with you. Okay, cool. What about architecture and planning? Like, are you seeing the tools kind of change the way that works?
I think the thing that's transforming is the ability to try things out. So it's not so much you do planning as oh, okay, I'm going to create this planning spreadsheet or whatever better. It's I'm going to change the plan to take advantage of the fact that I can do both and see which one is better. Or I can, rather than have a very long RFP process to select an off-the-shelf piece of software on the basis of what the vendor tells me, I can run a proof of technology comparatively cheaply to kick the tires. So it doesn't so much change the minutia of planning as change the trade-offs that affect what kind of planning it makes sense to do. So that's where that
Yeah.
actually, I think, like shaping projects around the fact that in some sense code is cheap, even if engineering is less cheap still, allows you to explore possibilities at a different rate than you would have if the coding was really laborious, or if it was very hard
Right.
maybe
Right.
to
Right.
learn a new framework or programming language to get going with it. You'd need to
Yeah.
bring someone on the team with different set of skills, and okay, so there's a lot of faff, so maybe we have to just analyze the future and go with that. But if you can try it out, you can let reality push back on you quite well.
Right. Okay. So like a hypothesis spike of we could, rehome this repository to a time series database,
Yeah,
might have taken a week or two minimum, to get to the point where you had your data set up in the new schema because it's, you're moving from influx to time series or timescale or whatever. But then, okay, and now we can actually start to look at that. But so to your point,
yeah.
like all these hurdles are go faster now.
Yeah, and it affects how much you're a victim of the sunk cost fallacy. So I've been
Right.
part of a lot of refactorings. Many have actually helped to pay down tech debt. Every now and again, you put your heart and soul into something that took a lot of the team equivalent of political capital and effort and creativity and effort, and then the result isn't as good because you just
Yeah.
didn't quite know what the design would look like. If that's taken your team person weeks worth of effort, it's pretty big call to say let's just revert, and maybe even difficult because we've done other things over the top of it. If you tried it out
Yeah.
and then just like, oh, actually, no, actually we were right the first time, then everyone doesn't have their egos invested in the big change, and you can let it, thank it
Right.
and let it go, and it's just taught you something,
Yeah.
and that's fine.
Yeah. 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 I like that. I like that. Okay. Cool. What about changes in testing? Are you seeing anything from sort of like manual testing, exploratory testing, to testing strategy, to automation? Anything in testing that you're seeing changed?
So I don't know what's going to happen in this space. So one angle would be we're only going to need QAs. That would be one spicy take. I think certainly between people working product, people working development, and people working QA, everyone has expressed to me at one point how only their thing is the thing that we still need, and we don't need the other two things, which is maybe expressing a collapsing of the distinction between them. So certainly a lot of the effort needed to write unit tests, or different kinds of testing, like I was saying earlier with property testing, is dropped. I think the exploratory mindset and exploratory function is definitely, if anything, more important, because you've got a plausibility generator generating things and
Hmm.
thinking, oh, actually, is that better? Is that what the users would want. Um, so
Right.
that's kind of say one thing that stayed the same. What maybe is a little bit different is, and this is probably a combination of planning and QA, is whether or not it is a good thing to drop in extra flourishes and features that weren't specifically driven by explicit planning. So let's the explicit
Mm.
example of I was talking to a colleague the other day was uh, a clip a paperclip icon next to a field that will allow easy copying. So on one hand, that's probably actually delightful. If a user wants to copy, that saves a bit of time. On the other hand, when we're coming to quality assure the overall system, the more we sprinkle things on it that wasn't explicitly what we were driven to do, the more we might actually have created complexity debt and feature debt and user confusion that we needn't have. So I don't know whether we should exploit the lovely fact that we have coding agents that can make adding things like that kind of why don't I just? Sometimes I'm sure it's the right thing, but I think if we give into that temptation frivolously, we might find ourselves making the end user's life harder rather than easier.
Yeah. Yeah, I think teams that tend towards lots and lots of product features and creating product debt. I think they're going to be able to do so much faster with these tools. Yeah, yeah. Okay, cool. I love that. So I think integration is interesting too. I mean, you've got sort of everything in there from like how well an LLM knows the code that it wrote yesterday versus the code that it's writing today. And
Yeah,
like, and like sort of, you've got the whole microservices. Should I even bother like with keeping everything in exactly one place, or do I let the duplication happen? And that sort of level of integration, right? Which is almost like code-based composition and
yeah.
design, but it is integration because those things end up needing to be integrated all the way up to like running CI pipelines and making sure that things are passing. Like what are you seeing changing in integration?
So there's one feature of the microservices paradigm that didn't really work out that I think was actually really important, but maybe was a bit hard for us to
Mm.
implement, which was the idea that the unit of architecture is the unit of deletion. So I should be making services at the point where if I don't want them anymore, I can delete it and create another implementation, another programming language, or another design, and I haven't got too much investment. I think in practice, people weren't really willing to do that because the cost was still too high. So that's kind of one thing. I think boundaries that allow you to uh, reuse or deuse gracefully has become an important architectural consideration. It's also important because coding agents, though they have prodigious context windows, the fact that they don't really have a hierarchical sense of context, so they're not as efficient using that context window as a human being, means that you really can't just throw a multi-million line code base in an LLM and expect it to understand. So that kind of like modularity is still important. And certainly in terms of good use cases for deploying coding agents, building things, saying here is a specific shaped hole in my architecture. This is what the schemas of the integration points looks like. This is what I need you to do. Can you color in that hole? That's actually a really good use case for a coding agent because it's optimal in context. They don't have to understand the whole world, and it's optimal in constraint. They can mark their own homework. So that kind of you say integration, I think maybe I'd be like boundary thinking is something that I've found myself increasingly doing.
Yeah, 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 yeah. We had a guest on previously, Aravind Sridharan, who talked about like he's spending a lot of his time focusing on the seams now, focusing on like what's the interface, what's the between things, and then you can let it go a little bit more inside the lines. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly. So yeah, Michael Feathers, I guess, was the person who invented the seams terminology and
I
working
suppose
effectively
so.
with legacy code. And so I think it's actually his
Yeah, yeah,
lesson is quite apt now. Where can I cut away,
yeah,
replace, test? Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Fair point. Oh, interesting. I hadn't thought about Welk in the face of all of this. Huh. Changes in deployment, changes in how anything's going on there. What do you see?
So I'm at risk of just saying "and I told you so" with deployment, I think. So I've been quite keen on continuous delivery for some time. You should keep your code in a state that it could be released and not require an external human to approve. Uh, I think that's just become even more important because those same pipelines that you would use to achieve continuous delivery are very close mapping to what would make for good safeguards to agent. I would even go as far as to say like that one of the most important books for effective agentic development would be Valentino Cerville's Continuous Deployment, because if you want to work effectively with coding agents, I think like if you understand that continuous deployment practice really well, you're actually almost there, even if you've never installed Claude Code. Almost all the kind of breaking out work and having effective unit tests and working in thin slices and graceful evolution of architecture with expanding and subtract of server and client and so on. That's most of it. If you've only installed Claude Code and you know every skill and you've got custom setup and you don't know anything about those kind of
Yeah.
practices feedback loop, you're actually a lot further from being an effective coding agent user, I think.
Oh, I think that's right. I think that's right. That's interesting. So, allow me to zoom in on that a little bit. I think you're very consciously and specifically calling out continuous delivery, not continuous deployment, not continuous delivery.
Yeah,
You're talking about the code should go all the way to production without a human being step in the middle,
yeah,
which
yeah.
says, yes, this is fine. Yeah, got it. So, and you may be calling out that that specific book does a very good job of explaining all of those processes, or you may be also zooming in, or mostly zooming in on getting, removing the human, which is more important there, do you think? Or help me split that atom with you.
Sure. And yeah, I think having multiple terms that have the same initials that almost mean the same
Don't
thing is
help.
a very bad thing. And I hope that we
Correct.
don't do it too often in the agentic coding versus AI engineering versus harness engineering kind of world. I hope we sort our stuff out, but I see no reason to believe that we actually will. The reason why I think continuous deployment is the important thing is that I see it as continuous delivery like you mean it. So continuous delivery would be like, okay, the code has to be good, so I could deploy it, but maybe I'm not. And the only difference really is maybe I'll decide not to. So continuous deployment would be my decision is always yes. I'm that bird that we mentioned earlier going
Yep.
yes, yes, yes. So to me, that
Yep.
holds you accountable for knowing that you are
Uh-huh.
actually doing it real. The only time there's
Got it.
actually a difference is if you're going to use your ability to not hit deploy to hold back a piece of code because you have some out of band reason for knowing that your safeguards are not good enough. So maybe you're right, in which case I guess it's good that it's not going all the way, but that creates a slightly lower accountability environment than the actual continuous deployment. So that's why I'm more of an enthusiast for that as a feedback mechanism to your engineering practices. I'm not saying that every client that I work with does it that way. Some do. Continuous deployment is one of those things where there's two groups of people. There's people who say it can never be done, and there's people who say, "Well, I just did it 3 times this morning."
Yesterday. So what are you talking
There's no
about?
one
Yeah.
in the middle, as far as
Yep.
I can tell. But
Yep.
I think certainly saying how if are we ready for continuous deployment? If the answer is no,
Yep.
I would say the reasons the answer is no are probably also the reasons why are we ready to go without reviewing
Yeah.
diffs on coding agents.
Yeah, 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 yeah. 100%. Amen. Well, and interestingly too, like I'm remembering the last time I thought about the CD versus CD argument, delivery versus deployment, it was kind of pre-feature flags, and like the ability to have a product person decide when to release something being very different from when a team deploys something has sort of made all of some of the distinction is a bit moot now, in terms of product having control. That was sort of like one of the last non-engineering reasons to value one over the other, and now that doesn't matter. So yeah, I'm with you. Like the engineering rigor is the important part, and you're enforcing that by simply creating this canon, which is going to send all code directly to the world as soon as it passes all the tests. Yep.
Yeah, I mean, Canon makes it sound.
Hmm.
Let's say there's this nice, efficient, clean rail that things slide to production on. Yeah,
I like that better. Yeah, non-military analogy for one. Okay, what about infrastructure? I think there's a lot of rich territory here, but what are you seeing in terms of how Gen AI is changing infrastructure?
well, sometimes it means you need more of it. That's the main thing. I guess
Mm,
I'm not sure how this is going to shake out. I mean, I think infrastructure as code, to be clear, is really important. I think that if you've got persistent infrastructure that can suffer drift over time, I would already have said moving to Phoenix infrastructure where you have full infrastructure as code and you rebuild things. That was already the way to do things, and I think it's, if anything, more important if you're using agentic coding. Maybe the main difference I can see is that at least I'm someone who's slung infrastructure about sometimes. I wouldn't say that I'm an expert cloud architect or that I understand the nuance between different clouds really well, or that I always have the ability to keep in mind the security or other policies that an organization might have about how it's going to set up the environment for a new set of microservices or whatever. So probably the main thing that I've seen that is exciting to me is the exposure through either MCP or just other context injection vectors, precise nature of those policies, so that if you do generate Terraform to define infrastructure, you've got a lot more of a reason to think that it'll match what you should be doing to be a responsible citizen in that environment. I must admit that when I was doing it by hand, well, A, the Terraform wouldn't be doing what I thought it was going to be doing, and then B, even once it did do what I thought it was going to be doing, it turns out the thing I thought I was supposed to do wasn't what I think I was supposed to do.
Yeah.
So the ability
Mm-hmm.
to shift in a way to shift that advice that would happen when the cloud person finally takes pity on me and gives me a bit more specific advice about what I should be doing, but I can inject that advice directly into the context window of the agent. Then I'm not saying we don't know there's people, but basically those people can help me. I don't know if I quite want to call it guardrails. It's more kind of context engineering rather than hard guardrail. But those people who have that important knowledge about what we should do can encode it in Markdown or linters or something else and inject that into the generation process, so it's more likely that we'll get it right earlier. But the actual infrastructure topology itself, I haven't seen anything change yet, but I think it's early days for the pressure of agentic coding to really come to bear on that part of the stack.
I like it. The first thing you said was, we're going to need more of it. And you could take from that, oh, Chris means like we're going to be writing so much more code and we're going to need more infrastructure. And I suppose that's true, but is that what you meant? Like, what did you have in mind?
So I was harking back to the earlier thing I mentioned with the ability to exercise lower value ideas because I can get them
Oh,
out there
yeah, yeah.
quickly. So I might
Mm-hmm.
put something in production with shadow traffic for a while was one example that is a real one. Maybe I wouldn't have done it before, but now I can arrange that and try it out, and then maybe discard the thing if the performance of the shadow system is not comparable to the thing I thought I'd be replacing. So you're
Yeah,
using
yeah,
infrastructure to give you more space to play in that context is what
yeah,
I was thinking about.
yeah. By shadow there, I think you mean like, I'm thinking of the GitHub scientist post where they talked about replacing, Git branch with a different Git, or no, it was merge actually. But essentially where you've got like 10% of your traffic or some
Yeah.
small percent of your traffic going to the new one. Yeah. Got it.
Well, I work in a
Got
lot
it,
of
got it, got it.
modernization contexts where maybe there is a thing that kind of it's really important because that's why it's kept around, but everyone's afraid of it, and we might want to replace it
Yeah.
with something we can change more easily. But we want to know for sure
Yeah.
that the new thing is the same as the old thing. So that's really, in my
Yeah.
mind, that's the key lesson.
Okay, cool. What about in debugging? Are you seeing anything changing the way debugging works?
Uh, so that's where some of the feedback tools can be really interesting. So the main advantage in debugging is that there's a situation where I can give the agent a feedback loop that allows it to understand the problem as well as I would. So the classic example that people often have an epiphany when they use for the first time is Playwright for driving browsers as an MCP server. So if what I can say is there's something wrong with the CSS, this box is the wrong size, you can see it, so go ahead and fix it, please. There's a stage in everyone's agentic coding life, I think, where they find themselves looking at things and then telling the agent what they see a lot. And this is an important stage to break through, because if you are at that stage, it's almost certain that you're not value adding. You're just like shoveling information back and forth between, oh, I'm looking at the browser. Oh, no, it's still wrong. Oh, it's still wrong.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
a really good
yeah,
trigger for the first part of where you start investing in your harness and your improvement of your agent to understand its own problems. Because if you, in this case, install Playwright, well, it can check the browser itself. You don't need to check it. What you
yeah.
then need to do is to
Yep.
set it off, say, this is what good looks like. This is what I'm seeing that's wrong. Let me know when it's fine.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. Okay. Next up is refactoring. Anything changing there?
Oh, well, this is another one of those, I think, big debates that have yet to be had. So there's an extreme end which says, oh, we don't need to refactor anymore. I think that involves a kind of slightly mendacious definition of what they mean by refactoring, but I kind of get it, that the idea that a human being would be having a copy of Martin Fowler's book kind of open, looking at different patterns, going, oh, okay, I see how I could extract a object method here. Let me do this. Let me tell IntelliJ through the keyboard shortcuts is what I'm doing, that kind of thing. I see that activity being important as a human activity is dependent on humans engaging kind of object by object and line by line being important. So I don't know. I really enjoy refactoring for the intellectual challenge of it. I can see that kind of code kata refactoring being de-emphasized, because if what you're taking my advice and you're having kind of external facing conversational quality, you kind of let that stuff sort itself out. It might be refactoring. You might actually ask the agent at some point, hey, is there anything in this code base that could be tidied up? And it'll say, here's these 10 things. And then you go, okay, do 3, 4, and 5, please. And do a separate git commit for each of them, check it in, and then let's move on. So it's a different human interaction. However, the main point of refactoring that Martin Fowler kind of talks about is improving the internal structure of code without changing its function, is something close to the definition. That is like really important, because I'm like, maybe doing it with a system level component. I want a new service that is like the previous one. It does all the same things, but it's written in the programming language that I want to switch to, or that it has better performance than the previous one, but gives the same answers all the time. So the idea of changing something, holding properties invariant, so some other property I care about, i.e. something that's about change or evolution that I can improve, that is massively crucial and will continue to be.
Okay, I follow that. I wonder if you saw Cassie Schum's hot take that refactoring is dead. When I channel my inner Cassie, I think what she was getting at there was being able to build sort of systems of requirement almost, so that you could just entirely regenerate something instead of needing to sort of refactor it. And I think she's thinking correctly about what refactoring means there.
Yeah.
Instead of like, we're gonna pick up this class
Yeah.
and make that method, return the same thing, but we're gonna change its inner structure so that it's now much more better, easier to read and so on. Like, no, just rewrite the whole thing. And as it has and it's more about the requirements than it is about the actual code. I think that's what she's getting at
Yeah.
there. So yeah, what do you think?
So I do have a take on this. So I guess Chad Fowler's maybe one of the best articulators of this. He's got this series of articles about the Phoenix architecture. So Phoenix, I guess similar to Phoenix infrastructure that I was talking about earlier, of rebuild. So rebuild from requirements. So I think that's an unsettled debate, but my take on it is that code will not be disposable, but it will be invisible. And I have a slightly maybe detailed explanation for why I think that's important. So I think that inspecting the internal quality by hand, if we are really good at creating harnesses for agents, will be de-emphasized until it becomes a more and more marginal activity. The reason why I think the code itself might be important is stability in generation. So one of the problems with spec-driven development is there's a bunch of choices that you are constraining, and there's a bunch of input choices that are being made at different points in the generation process that are arbitrary. If they weren't if you actually had everything constrained, you would have already described the system, right? You wouldn't need to generate anything. So there has to be some kind of information content that's being randomly chosen. If you regenerate, you need some reason to believe that the next time you generate, it's not going to make the wrong different arbitrary choices. So there are ways that you can do this where you try to make the algorithms of choice deterministic. So, okay, so that's why the menu is at the top and not on the left. And so a customer, or sorry, a client or a user who sees this website 3 times in one day doesn't see the menu jumping around from all directions. So that's one way of doing it. To my mind, I think the more straightforward way to do it that's more consistent with control theory is that the current state of the code base is an input to the next generation, so that you're effectively requesting the generation process to give me a small delta in order to reflect the fact that I've added a new menu item. So don't move the menu from the left to the top just because I've added a new menu item that is an about us. Don't arbitrarily design a new ways, because that's going to perturb the human beings who are consuming it. But give me something that, given that input, respect the new requirements with as minimal a change as possible. So that's why I think that the actual kind of like just delete the production code and regenerate is not going to be the best way to achieve stability in the implementation.
I'm with you. I'm reminded of a telephone company that I was working with, and of course, telephone company makes it sound simple. They also sell iPhones, and they, so many things. It's actually quite a complicated business, as you find out when you're working in it. But point being, they were talking about how like the often people in the store, if you ask the people in the store what things cost, they would look at the website to tell you what things cost, because whatever the website is telling customers is true as far as the customers are concerned. So like you may as well match it, and don't try to go into some other system and generate some other price, because that's not what your website told them right now. So that's kind of, you're reminding me of that a little bit in terms of like, well, the code is the current ground truth, whether it's right or not in a way, but yeah, but you might have an occasional bug slip in, but you might also have some smart stuff that you remembered and forgot to put in the spec. Is that kind of what
Well,
we're getting at?
if there's a bug, let's assume that the agent is correctly interpreting the spec for a second, right? So if it's correctly interpreting the spec, then that bug is there because you've got a delta between your expectations and your constraints. So that's where a kind of is incidental definition, I would say. AI slop is the extent to which your constraints on the generation are less specific than your expectations of the quality. So that's how the bug can creep in. So that means that we need to fix the harness or fix the requirements or fix the something and regenerate. And then if we're in a regenerative context where we're using the existing code base as a stability anchor, well, it does need to respect that new requirement, that new harness, that new check to fix the bug that you mentioned. But it does that with a minimal delta rather than by like throwing everything up in the air and starting from scratch and first principles. If you had an engineer who dealt with a bug by saying, oh, actually, I think the best thing I want to do is rewrite the system from scratch, you would probably not find that the best way for them to take it, even though it probably actually is, now I think about it, more frequent than I would like.
Yes. Yeah. Whole slew of memories coming back from that one. Yes. Cool. Okay. All right. Anything on dependency management? Thinking differently with how generative AI works?
Only just scared about the effect of generative AI on open source software supply chains. I don't think I have any clear answers, but both from the thankfully getting rarer accidental importing of a compromised dependency into your code base. That's kind of like I, I think that's less common at the moment. But I think actually the viability of the open source projects that are getting many pull requests, perhaps of dubious quality, maybe sometimes maliciously. I worry about that because when I have a dependency, I care partly about the present behavior, but I'm also caring about the tiny human institution that is the maintenance and promise of that library. And if I see the problem with kind of slot PRs opposing to open source software at the moment, I worry that I might not have good dependencies to depend on in the future. I guess I could say, well, I'll code it up myself, but I still think that having good atomic capabilities that the generative AI process can work with is the best way to get to high quality. So I hope we
Yeah.
see open source continue to thrive.
I like where you're going with that. Like we had Ahmed Nasri on, the CTO at Socket, and at socket.dev. And of course, they're doing, sort of code vulnerability checking of your dependencies and those kinds of things.
Yeah.
But something you said earlier about how, you didn't call it a bounty, but something like, using these tools means you get more time back. And if
Yep.
we reinvest that time in creating it, we could be using some of that extra time that we got back on, can you go look at that dependency
Right.
before we just go ahead and add it, yeah, so maybe there's a solution in the solution somewhere. Hmm.
Well, I think we can cope with the problem, but so I think we internal to the agentic system or the agentic coding system that needs these dependencies, we can do stuff to manage dependencies better. I'm worried more about the second order effect of will the dependency ecosystem rot over time
Yeah.
if
Yeah.
the
Yeah. Yeah.
if the human assumptions that led it to get to this like really rich, amazing,
Yeah.
wonderful thing that so many people have put free labor into, if that kind of is compromised, then having slightly better practices inside our walled garden may be a Pyrrhic victory.
Yeah, I made my first open source commit using Claude actually over the weekend, and I remember thinking, "Oh God, are they going to say like generated by Claude in the commit?" I almost thought about removing it, but I thought, no, 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 that seems intellectually dishonest, so I won't do that. And checking my own work after it was accepted, by the way, I noticed like, oh yeah, like some of the stuff that it put in the test suite is like overly echo. Now I'm doing this. And I kind of cringed. I thought, oh God, I'm part of the problem already. I mean, worse things than adding too many echoes to a test suite. But yeah, it's one small step.
Yeah, well, I think often when someone has communicated to another person using the output of generative AI, whether that's code or English or whatever language, probably the original prompt they put in was a more authentic and direct way of saying the thing. So,
Yeah.
I worry sometimes with people who use generative AI to write very verbose emails. Probably after I'd sometimes want to respond, just tell me what you gave the prompter, and then I'll know what you meant to say, because there's a lot of
Yeah. Yeah.
extra noise that's been added to the message. I think that can apply to open source as well. So certainly, I think there's a practice that started up which is not merging but rewriting. Uh, which is
Yeah.
kind of interesting, where if the rewriting of the pull request according to the preferences of the maintainer is cheap enough, then what a pull request becomes a proof of concept, and the person who merges it can actually just say, point their agent at there saying, please do that, but do it according to what you know about my design intentions. But honestly, I don't. To be clear, I'm not saying agentic AI will be the savior of open source. They just need to start using it, and they'll become more efficient. Everything that's fine. I think that we need to fix the trash input coming in the inboxes and pull request queues of open source maintainers in order to make sure that the ecosystem thrives.
Yeah. To your point, something I was really careful about was writing down what the fix was, why it was needed. I was really, and in precise, concise language. But yeah, no, I'm with you. I'm with you. Okay. A few more. What's it doing to pair programming, right? So one of the things I really loved about ThoughtWorks is I got to pair program all of the time. And as science predicted, I became addicted to it on some level, and I've never really had that since. We do okay at Navalia, actually. We do pretty well. So, but that's the teams that I serve, not me. I don't get to pair program. What are you seeing in ThoughtWorks? Are teams still able to, and what are you seeing outside of ThoughtWorks? How does pair programming work with the generative AI tools?
So I think there's pressures coming in two directions at the moment that I see. First of all, I think there is a reasonable case to have a smaller team, because the surface area of a given code base might be able to sustain two agents or eight human beings. So there is a bit more of a pod concept rather than a team concept arising. I don't know if it's sustainable. When it comes to working on sustained projects over time, though, I think I see pair programming is quite important in order to ask those meta questions about the harness, but also for knowledge transfer. So right now, how to use the tools really well is something that everyone, certainly including myself, is struggling with. So I think one of the most important bits of pair programming, it's kind of hard to justify to the business, is the acceleration of the rate of learning of tool use that it does. So you know, learning how to use your IDE better, learning tips and tricks about running tests in a different way. Those are the kind of things that I got massively better at, because I was actually seeing someone else's screen as they were actually doing their real
Yeah.
job, as opposed to just
Yeah.
the final result.
Yeah.
So if I look at it from a metaphorical lens, like, you don't have a co-pilot for a car, but you do have a co-pilot for a jet airplane. So
Yeah.
the
Yeah. Yeah.
faster it goes, the more benefit there is from having more than one uh, set of brain cells on it at the same time, I think. Now, that maybe
And the
that
more
analogy
people
will
are in the
break
back.
down, but that's my
Yeah.
first, that's kind of a projection, but that would be my opinion.
Yeah. Yeah. To your point, the faster it goes and the more people it's carrying. Yeah. I think that's totally right. That's it. One of the things that teams I serve, where some people pair and some people don't pair, Regardless, once they did start using the tools, I encouraged and scheduled some mob coding sessions where it's
Yeah,
like, hey, let's use the tools together. How are you using it versus how someone else is using it? Yeah, which is sort of meta on all of that.
yeah,
But
yeah.
yeah,
I mean,
I love where you're going in terms of like you need the pairing on some level because of the harness management. Like, yeah, I'm not doing any harness management at all, and it, because I'm just trying to get business value shipped. And but to your point, if I had a pair, like maybe I would.
yeah, maybe
That's
they'd say
smart.
like,
I like that.
are we actually approaching this the right way, Carl? Like, okay, we've just spent the last half an hour trying to get Core to
Yeah,
generate the right Lambda function. Is
yeah,
this a
yeah,
Lambda function problem?
yeah, yeah,
That kind of
yeah.
questioning is hard for us to hold ourselves for because we have a bunch of kind of, you know, rabbit hole biases that we do, and that's for me that's the big advantage of pair programming. It's not someone can rest their fingers while someone else waits, like
No,
does
no.
it. It's
Yeah.
actually operating at the different levels of questioning.
Yeah. And when you shift to I only pair with the agent, you're sort of assuming you're the right navigator all the time, and you're never you're never seeing another navigator. So yeah, it's definitely limiting. Anything you're seeing about team ratios, role ratios. You talked a little bit about this a minute ago, pods versus teams. Can you talk more about that?
Yeah, so I think there's a historical accident, which is that our software teams have lots of coders on them, and that's because coding is really painstaking. So it turns out that if you don't have, six coders along with the one user experience expert and one product person, then basically you spend a lot of time waiting for the poor person to actually like crank out the code. But I think that's where I'd love to see things going is a bit more, probably the same team size, because I think the team size is more of a function of human ability to sustain relationships and cooperate than any particular role. But I'd love for them to be more cross-functional and more encompassing of discipline. So maybe you have two
Hmm.
coders and you still have a two pizza team, but that pizza is feeding, someone who's a legal expert or someone who works on support desk for a particular piece of software,
Yeah.
basically more genuine diversity, because we say we have cross-functional teams, but often that means lots of coders and a little bit of something else.
Yeah.
I'd love for that
Yeah.
lopsidedness to be addressed.
Fair point. Okay. Cool. Does it change anything about how you hire, how you staff, train, and mentor?
Ah, well, I'm sure it will. This is maybe one of those more unknowns. I think the ability to learn is even more important at the moment because I don't think the state of tooling now will be the state of tooling next month, let alone next year. So I think that that ability to think critically and work well with others is really important. In terms of onboarding that you mentioned, certainly that is one area that, so the human onboarding, the getting to know people, let me just first say, I'm not intending to automate get to know you sessions or whatever the equivalent. However, the knowledge transfer of a code base is something that you can do a good job of. So it's always the case that you have like teams that are really conscientious would have, rather than just have a raw Maven file, they would have a build script that said like test.sh and run.sh and so on. They'd basically be creating affordances that meant a new person coming in was better able to understand how they interacted. Uh, I've seen a lot of success that teams having with skills or sub-agents or so on that are particular to their given project. So it's a similar kind of concept, but they're able to make those things operate at a little bit more of an advanced level. So to the point where, and this is just like I'm delineating between my experience, which is of people creating skills and customizations, to my speculation. Uh, will we see a point where having an unbroken chain of human to human transmission of knowledge about a code base, are we going to reach a point where that isn't the only or best way to maintain knowledge of systems? This is definitely this is a nice spicy take draw because it would change things a lot. But right now, the assumption is, oh, we have to have lots of teams everywhere. There's a big constraint on how we deploy our talent because if we break that continuity, people forget how that database worked, and we have a massive problem with reconstituting that context. If we could get to the point where we could take what a skilled developer would have done during an onboarding and embody that in context that is visible or accessible by an agent, maybe as an automated tool, maybe just as context. If we get good enough at that, maybe it's okay if there's a period of time where there's no human that's using their their brain to store that context before passing them to someone else. Because this chain of like, oh, the developer before me told me this, and I'm telling you, it's really fragile and gets distorted, and all sorts of things get lost anyway. It's not particularly effective, but we rely on it because we have no other alternative, and because documentation that is simply one character after another rarely achieves the level of vividness we need. So my hope is perhaps that we can be relieved of the burden of having at least one human being who like has their finger on the pulse of every system at all times, lest the
Yeah.
chain be broken.
Yeah, you're making me think of an enterprise organization I was working with. It was e-commerce, and you would want to work with their best developers, and often what that meant was they were constantly getting taken away because they were the only one who knew what that system did, and the only one who knew what that system did, and so yeah, and that's always seemed highly inefficient to me. That was an extreme version of it, but we sort of all have that. Like we so many teams I've been working on are like, well, we own this system and that system, this. And some of them they haven't touched for years, but somebody needs to own it. So to your point, we could sort of let go of that a little bit. And oh, I like that. I like that. Okay, cool. Well, you've been very generous with your time and with your thoughts. We are rolling down towards the last few questions now, finally. So I don't know if these get harder or easier, but what's something you've had to change your mind on? Something that was unintuitive at first?
Um, So I think something I'm changing my mind on is the granularity of making changes. So I was very attached at
Hmm.
first because of being a Kent Beck fanboy and so on, that you would have to write one test at a time and then fulfill that test and then refactor, kind of red green refactor, but red green refactor with n equals one. I think I've come to believe that I'm not sure that n does equal one for all situations in terms of like time taken and token cost and things like that. So I'd like it to be the case because I'd love it if I could just pull off the shelf my XP book and say to my agent, go do this. But I don't know the implications, but I think actually a larger chunking seems to perform better in my own experiments. And I'm saying this against the opinions of many people near and dear to me. That's why I kind of said it as a thing I feel like I have to change my mind on. So I could still yet be proven wrong, but that's kind of one of the ones recently.
Yeah, I don't think you are, and that's there seems to be a bit of a general consensus too. Okay, something, and this can be anything. This doesn't have to be career, even, much less more technology, but anything at all. Something you're most proud of.
Interesting. I still think and this is in a way a bit of an artist curse, but I still think that the talk that I'm most proud of is the first one I ever gave at scale, which is one called Functional Composition and was about writing closure code to explain bark cannons. The curse is that I still think that's probably my best talk, despite the fact that I did that maybe 13 years ago or so. And so to some degree, you have maybe that's a one-hit wonder sign. But the reason why I was kind of proud of that is I think it genuinely had some insight that maybe hadn't existed before that talk came into being. And it's something that I get messages every now and again, kind of in a lovely, delightful drip feed to this day of people saying, "Oh, I just watched you talk. It's really good. Why is your hair more grey now?" But I think that for me. Also, it's kind of my background educationally is I study both engineering and literature, and so it's maybe a more complete fusion of both of those sides at once than I've managed
Hmm.
before or since.
Ooh, I like it. I like it. Okay. What's something that's giving you joy right now these days?
Uh, Songwriting while playing music with other people in person, I think, is something. So
Oh, I
like
miss
that's
that.
that's a real kind of discipline, and I can fool myself. Maybe this has actually implications with agentic coding. I can fool myself into thinking that I really have something down or that I understand a piece of music when I'm practicing it at home in my bedroom. When you need to communicate that or react to someone else making a different decision in the moment, it's hard, but it's kind of like there's an
Yeah,
intensity of the listening and the human connection that you get out
yeah,
of that you don't get
yeah,
practicing solo.
yeah. Truly amazing. That feeling. Yeah, fantastic. Chris Ford, thank you so much. It has been really great talking with you today. I really appreciate you coming on the show.
Sure, thanks for inviting me.
Okay.